It's not only important that we create diverse, rich, whole characters, it's also important that we draw close to the identities that we're working to portray.
Bonjour, welcome to Wide Walls, a podcast where inspiring educators, researchers, designers, and innovators share their personal journey and their vision for creating better learning experiences for children. My name is Mathieu Penaud. I am a product manager and learning experience designer, and I am passionate about the role of design and technology in education and learning, and the humans behind it. If you find this episode insightful, share it with your friends and colleagues, and give us some stars on your favorite podcast platform. Thank you very much for your support and for being part of the conversation. And now, let's welcome our guest. Welcome everyone! Today I have the great pleasure of welcoming Janella Watson on the show. Janella is an educational and organizational strategist and champion of inclusion, equity, and authentic representation in children's media. She's an executive leader, brand manager, experiential learning specialist, and researcher whose transformative approach to advising inspires and guides clients to create curriculum, experiences, and media content that spark family engagement, learning, and joy. Janella is an accomplished international speaker and leading voice in culturally responsive education. Her team's recent and current clients and partners include Nickelodeon, Spin Master Entertainment, Brooklyn Public Library, Cartoon Network Studios, and Sesame Workshop. Today, we will first discuss her experience reframing family experiences at children's museums and science centers, and then we'll explore the topics of inclusion and equity when creating learning experiences and media content for children. Janella, I am honored to speak with you today. Welcome to the show.
Oh, Matthew, it is such a joy to join you and your listeners.
I'm very excited about this conversation. We will start with what I call rapid fire questions. So I will ask you some quick questions, and the goal is for you to answer first thing that comes to your mind, or like the answer that comes to mind. And if you want to elaborate a little bit, that's perfectly fine as well.
All right, a playful start.
Yes. So first, where did you grow up?
I grew up in the foothills of Oakland, California.
And where do you live now?
I now work, live, and play in Providence, Rhode Island.
Nice. And what was your favorite game as a kid?
Oh, this is a tough question to start off with, Matthew. I would say that I loved really any board game that brought my whole family together. Whether it was Monopoly, Clue, Scattergories, or Uno, we really came together and found a lot of joy in any board game.
Wonderful. And what was your favorite TV show as a kid?
Oh, I think about this quite often. I think that growing up, I really learned at the feet of everyone on Sesame Street. And to start, I've been a Muppet passionate my whole life. And so really in an era that included Sesame and Mr. Rogers, Electric Company, those were my jams.
I love it. And who was your favorite teacher?
Oh, I had so many extraordinary educators along the way. I would say that the teacher who I think of most often, really hour to hour and day by day, was Dana Barnett, my English teacher in high school. She had an extraordinary way of inviting us to each explore and express our ideas and to write stories. And she started each class with a writing prompt and an opportunity for us to journal that just lit me up, opened me up to new stories to explore. And she was also really a tough cookie as well. She had high expectations for what we would learn and what we would do with everything that she taught us.
Wonderful. It's interesting how some teachers that we have fond memories of were not necessarily the easiest, with us,
Yeah.
but we have some kind of respect for that as well as kids.
Yeah, she has such a profound respect for the written word, the spoken word, and it made her practice rather serious, but
Mm,
something that has felt indelible for me in my life.
wonderful. And talking about school, what do you think is one thing that all kids should learn at school?
I think that every child in a school environment should feel confidence, an opportunity to be and feel creative, a
Hmm.
sense of connection with each other, with their peers, and with the caring adults, and grow in their compassion.
Mm, yeah. And what is
Yeah.
one thing that all adults should learn at work?
Honestly, I think that the same threads ring true as we go and grow. So I really try to espouse and lead through compassion first, a shared understanding of each other, and a shared sense of humanity in all we
Mm.
do. I find that it's honestly just a spectrum of learning. It doesn't really shift or change too much from the time we are, the youngest learners until we go and grow into old age. That kind of sparking and sticking with our curiosity and leading with compassion are kind of the two most indelible lessons that I'm trying to learn.
Beautiful. And what is the skill you're the most proud of?
I think that one of the things that I am most proud of in my practice and in the way that I lead my life is finding connection between people, spaces, and ideas. I often think of it as being able to illuminate the invisible threads that kind of connect each of us. They also connect each of the places and spaces that care about kids and families. And so, one of my proudest gifts is being able to collect experiences to learn at the feet of each person that I cross paths with, and then a willingness to splash what I learn from those folks and in those spaces into the next.
I like this image of splashing. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
definitely messy.
Love that. And the creation you're the most proud of.
I have to say that motherhood has been transformative for me. And since the moment my kiddo came on the scene, we called him hands on professional development. And I feel that it's really an honor to see the world through his eyes, and to support him as he learns and grows. There's something extraordinary in that invitation to kind of slow down, to notice what he is deeply interested in,
Mm,
and to try to contextualize the rest of what he needs to learn through the things that bring him the most joy and that he's the most passionate about. I'm really grateful for the gift that being a caring adult to a young person brings to my life and to my practice.
wonderful. And I have two last questions. The first one is, what is the latest thing you did for work? And that you can share, obviously.
Oh boy. Well, hour to hour and day to day, my work days are filled with such wildly divergent projects. Um, we are, my team and I are just wrapping up what we hope will be a really useful tool, a guide for parents, caregivers, and educators on combating Islamophobia. It
Mm.
is something that we are developing with our partners at Nickelodeon and The Conscious Kid. And so I hope to share with you
Yeah,
and others
that's exciting.
as it comes to life in the next few weeks.
Oh, that's exciting. Yeah, I'll definitely look forward to it. And what is the latest thing that you did to relax?
I think that, well, I sigh a lot. That's my first natural answer, Matthew. Um, you know, for me, I find my reset and I am most myself in nature. So whether it's a hike in the woods or a little bit of stargazing, or even just stepping into my garden between Zoom meetings
Mm,
to reconnect, get my hands in the soil. That is kind of the constant for me that brings me back to that grounds me.
mm. Well, thank you for all your thoughtful answers. Really appreciate it.
Great
And now we
questions.
know you. We know you a little better, and I would love to start this conversation with asking you, what do you feel like when you think back on your journey from where you started to where you are now? Like, how does it make you feel?
That is such a lovely and generous question, Matthew. Thank you for it. I have found recently that I've been very kind of head down in my work and not necessarily lifting my head to think about the journey or the impact. So, appreciating this question as an opportunity to do so. I think that when I think back on my journey, I feel a mix of pride and of gratitude. And the pride stems from honestly the journey that my team at Watson Creative Consulting is on with me. Their generosity in sharing their expertise, their joy, their passions, their vulnerability in the midst of the work that we endeavor together is something that I feel so deeply grateful for.
Mm,
Um, it's really an honor to get to brush up with the passion projects of each of our clients along the way and to help them strengthen what they are creating on behalf of kids and families. And I feel a tremendous sense of awe at
mm,
being able to being invited to take my penchant for kind of wandering and wondering through project after project and to get to share some of the passion that I have for connecting kids and families and helping them feel seen and see possibilities for themselves
mm.
in the world around them. It's really an honor and a joy to do so.
Yeah. And so you started working in the field of museums. That's where you did about half of your career. Is that
Oh
right?
boy,
Say so.
if I'm lucky, yes. I was in, children's museums and science centers for a little bit over 20 years,
No,
um,
more than
and
that.
my journey started at the Cole Children's Museum of Greater Chicago, all those years ago on a chance afternoon where the kiddos who I was babysitting asked if they could go, to the museum on a Saturday. I walked into the space and immediately asked if there were any positions open. I, um, you know, children's museums are such extraordinary places, and I felt my fit there almost immediately.
Wonderful. And so, what did you do at the beginning? What was your role at the beginning?
So I have, um, I began as a museum educator and as a grants coordinator for an incredible professional development program in project based learning with some extraordinary educators along the way. And so I learned from Erica Miller and some of the kind of godmothers of project based learning, Judy Harris Helm, Lillian Katz, all about the wonderful affordances that project based learning has for young learners. And so, in addition to facilitating field trips and developing programs for the museum, I I had this extraordinary learning experience myself with a deep dive into Reggio Emilia and the tenets of Montessori and the project approach. And it really showed me very clearly how inviting kids into sensory rich experiences that are driven by their interests, their questions, what they wonder about, could be such an extraordinary path to
Mm,
contextualizing all that our kiddos need to practice and learn along the way.
mm. Can you tell us a little more about the play-based learning, what it entails, and why it is such a great way for children to learn?
Absolutely. So, I, in the midst of all of my museum experiences, I have kept kind of a curiosity about child development at the heart of my practice. And as I learned about neuroscience and how the young brain develops, I was just fascinated by the notion that our brains from a very young age are experience expectant, that it's actually like brushes up with phenomena and those sensory rich experiences, the connections that kiddos make between materials that they're exploring in their worlds that lay the foundation for healthy development as kiddos grow. And so I think that the joy that I find in children's museums and science centers and informal learning spaces really stems from that notion that hands-on, sensory-rich exploration is the pathway to building our voice, our confidence, and our agency.
Mm,
And so play, I think, it really is the most essential work of not only every child, but of each of us. It's what lends to our flexibility in our thinking. It's the seat of problem solving, and it's also where we get to explore the pieces of ourselves and discover not only kind of the interests and passions that will drive us in our learning journeys, but also where we get to put on roles, pretend, and imagine new
mm,
possibilities for ourselves. Play is serious work. I've been fortunate, Matthew, along the
mm,
way to not only get to be close to children's and families' play, but also to talk with researchers who study play. And it's been one of the most kind of generative and generous invitations I've had. I got to study play with David Sobel and Laura Stricker at Brown University in the Causality and Mind Lab as they were exploring what children learn through play in museums, in
mm,
informal learning spaces. And through that research, it really solidified for me that it really demonstrated to me how deeply capable children are of exploring new ideas and building on their experiences.
mm,
In that research, we studied video of children playing in museum exhibits and got insight into the goals that children create for themselves in the midst of the play, how they interact with their peers and their near peers, those kiddos who are younger and older than them in the midst of the play, how they engage with and learn alongside the caring adults who are on the museum journey with them. And every bit of that research really lit me up. Um, it helped me understand a little bit better the generative and extraordinary place that museums can have in the lives of kids and families in terms of that distinct invitation to kind of let go of our kind of inhibitions and just find connection together in joy, in whimsy, and in the wilds of play.
mm. Yeah, No, that resonates a lot with me, and the experience I've had also. I've worked a lot with the Science Center in Singapore when I was back there, and
Mhm.
just seeing how children naturally interact with anything that you put forward to them, any sort of exhibit or non-exhibit, they will interact with everything that feels like meaningful and playful, and learn from that. And yeah, I also, that joy that you talk about is something that I felt too,
Mhm.
creating experiences for children in this kind of environment. So yeah, thank you for putting it in such like great words. That definitely resonates. And I want to kind of like have try to look at it from a concrete perspective, as when you were like the director of early childhood education at the New York Hall of Science. So I'm just
Yes,
like
at
thinking about
NYSA.
one of your projects. You created the
Mhm.
Little Makers program. Love to learn more about that, and I think it'd be interesting to hear from you how you translated these learnings that you had and this experience that you had about how children learn and play, and the kind of experience you wanted to create for them, and how you translated that into like a concrete program experience at this museum.
Oh, my pleasure, Matthew. So I joined the New York Hall of Science, lovingly called NYSI, when they were first beginning to host World Maker Faire, with the extraordinary folks behind Maker Faire and gathering together tinkerers and engineers and creators from around the globe. As I experienced all of the joy and the intense sharing in the maker community, I knew instantly that I wanted to have very young children and their families feel at home in maker spaces, in fab labs, in any and all of the spaces that were inspiring design thinking and problem solving, materials exploration, and literacy. I had the wonderful fortune of working with some extraordinary researchers and educators at the New York Hall of Science who were leading professional development and creating programs and opportunities for design engineering and all of the beauty of STEM along the way. And they helped me understand how young children could find a an invitation and an entry point for all of those essential skills that they were exploring with middle schoolers and high schoolers and beyond. And so Little Makers was born as an invitation into materials exploration, sensory rich kind of science phenomena to be explored, and it really started as an experiment, a little bit of a rogue um, program, in that we aimed to create experiences that children as young as 18 months and their caring adults and siblings and grandparents could dive into together. And so I really took all of the elements that I had learned through that work in Reggio, in Montessori, in project based learning, and brought it to the fore in Little Makers. Each program started with a science theme that we would explore, be it sound or beginning circuitry, or even shaking up batches of ice cream, exploring kind of kitchen chemistry and the ways that ingredients interact together. Um, each of the Little Makers workshops started with a set of storybooks that could inspire the kinds of exploration and understanding of the kind of scientific underpinnings of the activity we were exploring together, an opportunity to kind of play with the materials and the phenomena at the heart of the maker activity, and then extraordinary explainers, the youth and young adults in the museum environment who would facilitate a hands-on making experience in each of the workshops. It was really a series 1,000 little experiments strung together. And what made Little Makers so impactful on me and the practitioners who nurtured it into life was that we also saw it as an opportunity to collect and share the stories of what was happening in the makerspace as it was happening. And so each workshop included an opportunity for families to share what they had created, whether it was muraling after shaking up those batches of ice cream, or giving some kind of video kind of testimony as to what they had experienced, what they noticed, what they wondered about, and then capturing and sharing those stories with the rest of our museum colleagues. At the end of each weekend, we would kind of compile those stories and share. And it really created a rich community of kind of multi-generational learners who came together to delight in
Mm.
these kind of early makerspace experiences together.
Oh, I love this focus on bring the family together, and not just focusing on children, for example, but really making sure that everyone is involved. I think it's
It's truly,
fascinating.
I think, one of the most indelible pieces of my practice across all of the projects that I endeavor, Matthew. It's that sense that really in a makerspace and in any space where we are privileging joy, exploration, curiosity, and creativity, it's an invitation to kind of rethink who the expert and who the novice is in any given space and situation. And so I find that in children's museums, in science centers, but also in libraries and in community centers, when the caring adults can follow the children's lead, when they can honor the gifts that they bring, when they can demonstrate respect for how capable young children are, that's where the truest and most indelible connections
Mm.
happen. It's where kids feel safe and seen, and feel that they are kind of partners in that learning experience, in ways that I think only enhances their sense of self, their invitation to like be their most curious selves,
Mm.
and also I find it that it is really helping families connect more deeply with each other is the greatest. It's the greatest prize in the midst of all of the work that I do.
Yeah. And in the previous conversation that we had, you told me that one thing you wanted was to change the frame of who a museum is for. And so I
Mm,
wonder if that's kind of like linked to what we're talking about right now. There's other things that you mean by this phrase.
absolutely. Well, and I think that it begins with that work at the New York Hall of Science. It taught me very early and often that it's not only about lowering the barriers to entry into these kinds of joyful spaces. Not everyone grows up feeling that museums are places for them. We're conditioned socially, and especially, you know, for folks from marginalized communities, museums can feel more fortress-like and impenetrable than they often feel as welcoming spaces that belong to everyone. And
Mm.
so the work at the New York Hall of Science and the work of my colleagues to invite the intensely diverse, linguistically rich neighbors of the museum into those spaces, into the museum's programs, and ensure that they not only felt a sense of welcome, but a sense that this space was always meant for them.
Mm.
That, the work there at that museum has been a kind of constant inspiration to me. And it followed me into the other pockets of work that I have engaged in since. I had the extraordinary fortune of working with a visionary, a social worker named Heidi Brinig. And Heidi had created an extraordinary program within a children's museum inviting court separated families in for their visits as they were working toward reunification or permanency planning. So, in the program that Heidi created and shepherded for 30 years, kids who have been removed from their parents' care have their visits with their parents in museums exhibits in an extraordinarily joyful place where play and learning come at ease, come so
Mm.
naturally to families in that space. And seeing the connection sparked between these kids and their adults really transformed my practice. It shook up my idea of who a museum was for,
Mm.
and also helped crystallize for me the invaluable nature that of welcoming every child into the rich experiences in a museum's walls, where families were in earnest practicing, sometimes for the first time, that those playful, joyful skills that come with
Mm.
getting down on a child's level, seeing the world through their eyes, and just tinkering, exploring, laughing and splashing together in a museum's exhibits.
Yeah, that's a very inspiring and kind of like powerful lesson to kind of break out of that. I won't say a bubble, but that kind of vision expectation we have sometimes because we don't break out of the environment we live in. We don't necessarily adjust like the spaces we go to people that are outside of that environment. So I think that
Yeah.
that's beautiful.
I think I think, Matthew, that is really spot on. That set of experiences showed me that a museum could have a social service heart. And in the midst of that work, Heidi and I were invited to work with the Rhode Island Department of Corrections to make visitation at the correctional facilities between children and their incarcerated parents more playful. And it was such an extraordinary experience that really broke me open in the best possible ways. On my very first Saturday, with families in the facilities, I met two kiddos who were my son's schoolmates. And it was a moment that made me say, these are all our children, and recognize that they were learning and playing and building social emotional skills side by side. It crystallized for me the impact of permission to play and to laugh and to learn in any environment, and its impact on especially children who have experienced trauma in healing and growing through those adverse experiences.
Mm.
Really, those
Yeah, it's so
experiences
important.
shook me to my core and helped me transform my practice with the understanding that I wanted social service and social justice to be the heart of whatever I endeavored next.
Yeah, that is so important. Thank you for sharing this story because I know that's a personal story, and at the same time, it's so universal. I think people, need to hear it. I'm glad and very grateful that you shared this story with us. And that's a great segue to talk more about how can learning designers and children's content creators more generally provide experiences that have that component of social service, social justice, or just more inclusive. What would you recommend to them?
This is my favorite question of them all. So, the heart of the work that my team and I do in the world is inspired by research from UCLA's Center for Scholars and Storytellers. The researchers there have developed a approach called authentic inclusive representation that means creating stories and experiences that are reflective of each of us and each child in every dimension of our identities. And so we start with the tenets of wanting the stories that we tell to be rich, authentic, and joyful, and for the characters that we create, the experiences that we develop to be culturally responsive and culturally inclusive. So, my team and I, we train and coach content creators and creatives of all kinds to reflect the dimensions of race, ethnicity, culture, gender identity, disability in the midst of all that we create for kids. It means owning our own biases, being willing to spot stereotypes and tropes in the stories that are often most indelible in our culture, and ensure that we're reflecting stories with integrity
Mm,
and with a sense of joy and playfulness that are really at the heart of each experience that I think children deserve.
mm. And what do you think of the current media landscape? That's a broad question, but just in terms, even in like terms of trends or what you see out there, in terms of inclusion and equity, what do you think of the current landscape?
I appreciate you asking that, Matthew. So, across the past few years, I have definitely seen some growth and shifts in some of the great storytellers' willingness to unpack their practices, to slough off the tenets that no longer serve us in terms of the stories that we choose to tell. And by and large, I have felt encouraged by the willingness to enter into more dynamic and tough conversations as it relates to diversity, equity, inclusion. I think that those kind of shifts and changes fall often into kind of two pockets. There are transactional shifts and changes, the ways that some content creators, unfortunately, treat diversity, equity, inclusion as kind of a set of boxes to be checked. And I've seen others who understand that at the heart of what we create is relationship and are willing to engage in the uncomfortable conversations that lend to the richest work on the other side. When I think on where children's media's roots are, I think most often of Mr. Rogers of Sesame Street and the kind of indelible evergreen programs that were most reflective of the diversity and the beauty of the communities that we live in,
Mm,
and that helped children from every race, ethnicity, and culture see themselves in the characters created. And I think that those tenets are still active in of course, the work of Sesame Workshop, but I've seen them kind of shared by an extraordinary number of creators and producers along the way. And some of my favorite children's content really stems from my own family's TV watching. One morning, I overheard a very sincere and sweet conversation between my kiddo and his dad about Craig of the Creek. And Craig of the Creek from Cartoon Network Studios has such an important place in my heart. My husband was explaining to our kiddo why Craig and his family means so much to him. Kevin was really expressing that it wasn't often in his childhood that he saw a family that looked like his, that honored the kind of quirkiness of its characters. And for me, all of the kids who are part of that creek, from characters who have rich gender identities and those who are invited to really be their full, authentic, quirky selves. I find so much encouragement by
Mm.
through that project and ones like it who that are really giving all of our children kind of a mirror to see themselves reflected in joyful, authentic ways on screen.
Hmm, that's very interesting. It actually makes me reflect on how we consume media today and how, like, between 20 years ago, where media was mostly TV, right? Now we have all these streaming channels and that plethora of
Mm.
choice. Like, there's so many options that we have. If the goal, I don't say if the goal or the future is more to have a variety of shows that kind of focus on one representation doing it very well with their own voice versus shows that target a larger audience and try to include as many, as many background and many type of people and experiences within that show, because I feel that's two kind of different directions that I wonder like what feels like more relevant or more important if both have their place.
Yeah, I really think that actually both are such necessary pieces of the landscape. We often say, one character is not meant to tell the story of 1,000 people or 1,000,000 people like them. They're only meant to tell their own story, right? And to
Mm.
reflect an experience that is true to the kind of lived experience of that character themselves. So I think that, you know, there are identities that are so rarely reflected in media, and too often aspects of identities that are stereotyped, or where the most traumatic thing that has happened to us, to our family, or to our community is the only story that we're invited to tell. And
Mm.
so I think that one of the key pieces for me is that I'm often reminding myself, my teammates, and our collaborators along the way that no character should have to lead with their trauma, with the most challenging things that have happened to them, and that our characters should be rooted in joy, in their connection with others. And I do think that there is room for the kind of deep dive into a story that really helps us understand and connect with the character very deeply,
Mm.
along with those ensemble, shows and pieces of media that are reflection of the kind of wonderful tapestry of humanity and that echo back to us kind of all of the dimensions of the world that we live in. Oh, what a
Yeah.
good question. Thank you.
I love that. I love the answer. I love this idea of not leading like the character by the first thing we might think about a type of character and the trauma that they might have been through. Even Because
Mm.
sometimes we think trauma equals drama equals like tension and all of that, but
Yeah.
there's so many other ways to bring that element. It feels like it's almost like the easy way, and it's like going past that is so important. I love that. I'm wondering if you have other similar. I'm just thinking concretely when we create this experience, like this content. Are there some other like concrete guidelines such as this one that you kind of try to keep in mind or to advise others on that will help build those experiences that are more representative or inclusive?
Absolutely. I think that I'm often drawn to so much of the stories that we choose to tell and the experiences that we create for kids and families is a reflection of the creator. And so it's not only important that we create diverse, rich, whole characters, it's also important that we draw close to the identities that we're working to portray. So for me, it means that what we put on screen is only as powerful as what's happening behind the scenes. And so that means turning to our colleagues as kind of cultural touchstones in the midst of the work and inviting those with lived experience and with expertise to share to really take a look with us at what we're trying to create to ensure that it is created with fidelity to the character's experience, and that it is a positive portrayal of the dimensions of the community that we are representing in the characters that we're creating.
Hmm. Yeah, that's so important. It's interesting because that's something I was actually discussing, but from a different angle, and we won't dive into that because that would be a whole conversation. But like how AI today and generative AI like create that content, but it comes from that one source. It does not necessarily like bring in the voices of the people that you want to tell the story of, and they should be the
Mhm.
one telling the story or at least participating in the creation of that story. And so that is a big question for like what the future entails in terms of how we use technology to tell stories.
Absolutely. When we reprise this our conversation down the road, Matthew, that will be the first topic on our list.
Exactly. Maybe that's going to be for conversation number two. Great. Thank you so much for all your answers. I have one more question that I love to ask everybody. If you could design a school around one thing, what would it be and why?
Hmm. What a gorgeous question to end this conversation on. I think that the heart of a school experience should be, I'm going to cheat a little bit, Matthew, in my
All
response.
good.
And joy, exploration, play, and connection. I think that all of our children deserve nothing less.
Wonderful. That works for me. I'll take it. Awesome. Thank you so much, Janella. Where can people find more information about you and your work?
I invite folks to connect with me on LinkedIn, Janella Watson. You can learn more about my team's work at watsoncreativeconsulting.com.
Awesome. I'll put all the links in the description of the episode. Once again,
Beautiful.
Janella, thank you so much. It was such a wonderful conversation with you. And
Such a joy to be with you, Matthew. Thank you for the work that you are pouring into the world. We're all better for it.
thank you.